Welcome to the Infomullet YouTube channel. If you enjoy this content, please like or share. And if you'd like to support the Infomullet by becoming a mulleteer, visit us on Patreon. We appreciate your support. The second question on domestic instability was, remember back in 2019, Hong Kong was the top of the news. The instability in Hong Kong. I did my dictator's dilemma structure. It had protests all over the summer of 2019. It had turned into literally a failing city-state by the November of 2019. So one of the questions 2019 leading into 2020 was, hey, what does it take for US citizens to mobilize like you're seeing in Hong Kong? And the example they gave was like corruption. And are we going to see mass mobilization sustained at the Hong Kong levels? Now remember, Hong Kong mobilization is an order of magnitude higher than what we're seeing here, both by per capita, by intensity, by sophistication. They've obviously been practicing it a lot more, but they are, before the big crackdown happened midway through this year, the Hong Kong mobilization was what I would call a mass mobilization. They had hit that threshold of the population. The Black Lives Matters movement, the protest, and even this post-election nonsense protest of the election fraud and all that, those have not hit mass mobilization levels. You're talking about 4 or 5% of the total population going out, 7% of the total population going out and being mobilized. They've been significant, but they aren't mass mobilized. And the reason why, when I talked about this forecast, I said there's going to be no mass mobilization in the US on something like corruption. I said red-blue polarization is on causes like corruption. You know, Maslow's hierarchy of needs, it's a classic way of thinking about how do we viscerally react to things. The last thing I talked about instability was very techie, wonky, structural demographics. This is now much more emotive and personal. And the hierarchy of needs, it starts at physiological concerns, my personal comfort, security and safety, and then it goes all the way up to like self-identity actualization. Do I feel good about myself? Do I feel good what I'm doing? Do I have a self-identity and associative? When we talk about red-blue polarization for most population segments in the US, most, not all, it's at what I would call the higher level of Maslow's hierarchy of needs. It's about self-identity. I'm blue because I support these things, and I'm red because I support these things. I get warm, fuzzy neurochemicals by being part of my self-identity and doing that. That is a level of Maslow's hierarchy of needs that's not going to sustain mass mobilization, and people are not going to risk their jobs, their comforts, to go out and get arrested and spend time in jail when it's much easier to argue on social media for the 5,000th time about why red is horrible or blue is horrible. So when you're at this level of Maslow's hierarchy of needs where it's about abstracted self-identity, that's not going to sustain. I mean, you may have flare-ups, you may have things like that. It's not going to sustain mass mobilization protest. What's different, though, is if what you're protesting is a matter of physical security or safety. And this is where I talk specifically. If you see mass mobilization, it's going to occur in places like Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter is much more, this isn't like an abstracted, how you feeling. It's literally like we are experiencing this in our communities. We live it every day with the police over policing, the threat of what we perceive as violent police reaction or overreaction. This is about security and safety, and therefore it's a much lower level of hierarchy Maslow's of needs, and it's much more sustainable to drive forward. And I think you saw this. So when I did this forecast and I said no, I said exceptions are, and this was interesting, I said one of the exceptions is Black Lives Matter. That's a gimme, not hard to predict that. If there's a police shooting, that's been the trend in the recent days, it happened. But I also mentioned sharp economic hardship. And this is important, I think, for people to understand. When we talk about these pandemic responses, you can't just poo-poo the economic harm that results from the shutdowns. Now, I think the government should be supporting it and stepping in, just like if we're in a wartime or some other national crisis. But when you have a sharp economic hardship, that hits you right in the physiological, the security and safety and comfort. Where am I going to sleep? Is there going to be a roof over my head? Am I going to have food? Is my kid going to be able to do things? Those are enough to get people motivated and out there. And to the extent I think we saw these Liberate Michigan, you know, stuff like that. It's easy to call it nonsense because the pageantry around it was a little bit silly, but these kind of sharp economic hardships will drive people into mass mobilization. First of all, they're out of work or they're worried about it. Second, it's hitting them right where it counts in that physiological or security level of Maslow's hierarchy needs. The other one, I see this all the time when I do insurgency studies, sustained mass violence by the government is a real accelerant on mass mobilizations, but we don't see that here in the U.S. I mean, even with the deaths we're talking about, I'm talking about what you see in Iran or Iraq, where hundreds or even thousands of people are wounded or killed by the government each month. we're nowhere near that level. I mean, it's bad, but we're nowhere near that level. Thanks for watching the video. Hope you enjoyed it. If you'd like to follow the Infomullet, visit us on Facebook or Twitter. And if you'd like notifications when we post new video content, click on the red subscribe button below the video. If you've ever wanted to become a mulleteer and support the Infomullet, visit us on Patreon. We appreciate the support.